Hello, School Transportation Nation. Tony Corcoran here. We're glad you made it to the podcast. It's brought to you by TransFinder, the leader in school bus routing software. We also have a new sponsor this week, which is Nuvi, and they are providing us a green tip. So we're excited for that. We've also got a great interview coming up with an old friend of STN. We haven't seen her in a while. Her name is Nicole Portee. She's the Assistant Superintendent of Operations for Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools in North Carolina. And that name should sound familiar because Nicole has graced the cover of School Transportation News magazine as a Transportation Director of the Year. At the time, she was the Director of Transportation in Colorado out in Denver. So we love Nicole. We're excited to have her back on the podcast. And Mr. Ryan Gray is getting the opportunity to interview you. So Ryan, tell us a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to catch up with her. As you mentioned, she was the 2018 STN Transportation Director of the Year when she was the Executive Director of Transportation for Denver Public Schools. And like you said, she's now at Charlotte-Mecklenburg as an Assistant Superintendent of Operations. And it's great to see her. Of course, as I mentioned a little bit later when I'm talking to her, we have the ability to see each other with video. Of course, all of you out there in the nation just hear our wonderful voices. But I get to see Nicole, catch up with her. We tried to get her to TSD conference in November. It didn't quite work out, but I'm going to see what I can do. We have STN Expo Indianapolis coming up June 2nd through the 6th. And about 6 weeks later, Tony, right back at it in Reno, STN Expo Reno, July 14th through the 19th. So I'm going to see if I can cajole Nicole.
I'm hoping she can make it. It's just, she can see old friends. I know we get a big Colorado contingent. So, It's all about networking and community and coming together. And that's always the importance. And I know you and I just got back from the NSTA meeting, which is the National School Transportation Association, which represents private fleet operators. They put together a nice meeting, and we went out there, kind of absorbed all the content, all the discussions, all the networking. What were some of your big takeaways from that meeting, Ryan?
So the NSTA midwinter meeting down in San Diego, the gorgeous U.S. Grant Hotel, second oldest hotel in the city. That was fun. Downtown, gas lamp area. But really the conversation focused on two things. Surprise, electric school buses. That was the first topic that really launched the midwinter meeting. And I think it was really great. One of the panelists mentioned putting the cart before the horse. That sounds familiar, Tony. I think we've said that exact same thing recently several times on the podcast when we're talking about the Clean School Bus Program, electric school buses, and the infrastructure. Everything that we've been writing, talking about, people we've been talking to, experts have been imploring folks out there, if you're interested in electric school buses, if you want electric school buses, you have to get the infrastructure going first. And that was really what the conversation started on, was all of those challenges. So we had about, I think it was 119 attendees. It was a record midwinter meeting attendance. It's with President Karina Noble. She's, of course, the vice president of communications and marketing with National Express. So it was a great turnout. I think, coming out of COVID, we're trying to put everything in the rearview mirror. So it was great to see everybody engaged. Of course, so much interest and hand-wringing about electric school buses and that concern. Certainly it was great to hear perspectives from the OEMs, as well as from infrastructure providers and the operators out there, these business owners, talking about, where the rubber meets the road here and a lot of the opportunity that's out there with electric school buses, but a lot of the hard work that lies ahead. And, we got an update from Becky Weber, who is NSTA's lobbyist with Prime Policy Group in DC. And she mentioned with round 2 of the EPA Clean School Bus Program, it's looking like it's going to be April, May So we knew it was going to be in the springtime, but just get a little bit more definitive time frame there for all of us to be on the lookout for. So certainly, that stood out, and something that has not uh, been on the radar as much is an additional $1 billion that's available to the industry. That was a direct uh, uh, result of the Inflation Reduction Act from last fall. So another $1 billion that's going to be available with this clean heavy duty vehicle program that's being enacted, and it was really developed. We understand for school buses, though trash trucks are going to be included in that, but really. I guess the insiders are saying that really this is a school bus bill, so that's going to be rolling out likely later this year. So a lot of green bus discussion, and then the other thing was safety. A lot of talk about the danger zone and illegal passing. Strategies to try to combat that. Of course, we've seen the numbers, according to industry surveys, really skyrocket in terms of those illegal passings. And it's a great segue into an article that we have in the magazine this month about danger zones and looking, yes, at illegal passing, but also looking at the visibility of buses. And we can't forget the training of the drivers. Over the 52 years or something of that Kansas loading and unloading survey, there's more students that have been killed at the hands of their own school bus or a pedestrian at the hands of a school bus than have been illegal passers. Not to discount that, the illegal passing is being referred to as at an epidemic proportion, but certainly, we got to look at all of school bus safety. So the conversations in San Diego really centered on the illegal passing, but that was one thing that stood out to me that I feel that we really need to look at the role the school bus driver plays. Obviously the training is unparalleled, but we have this driver shortage, Tony. We keep talking about it, and we keep hearing about late school buses, right? And kind of what that does. And we had a horrific tragedy in Colorado last year that spurred a legislation that actually didn't pass, but that was trying to address school bus safety. And essentially, a lot of these school buses are late, and you have school bus drivers who are trying to rush to get to the next stop, and they're and tragedy happens. You have maybe some students running after buses. We saw a fatality recently, the same kind of deal. A student running after a bus. They shouldn't be doing that, but you got to remember these are kids. And it comes back to training. We have to be training our drivers. We need to be training our students on the expectations. We need to be training the parents on school bus stop safety. So, a lot of great discussions, and it was great also just to reconnect with so many associates, peers, friends in the industry, and have a little bit of fun. So that's what really stood out to me.
Yeah, excellent, Ryan. I know we saw our friends at First Student down there, Claire Miller. She's great. She's VP of Strategy at First Student, and they are a new sponsor on the nation, and they're the nation's leader in student transportation solutions, Ryan. And they want to share with everybody that they have a unique approach to transportation solutions, that they can help your district. They have a local team with a national network of support, collaborative planning, customized services that keep your fleet operational and your students safe. First Student moves more passengers per day than all other U.S. airlines combined. Caring for students is their first priority. And as a leader in electrification, they recently reached another major milestone by driving over 1 million miles. To learn more, you guys can visit them at firststudentinc.com. That's firststudentinc.com. Yeah, Ryan. More from the conference. I know they kicked it off with that EV panel of OEMs. They had Jim Crowcroft from Thomas Built Buses, Tom Polzin from IC Bus, and Frank Gerarder from BYD. And the panel really, for me, broke down the landscape of what was happening. And what really landed for me, Ryan, was the call for districts and contractors to kind of redefine how they budget for capital purchases of school buses, because the challenge really becomes you've got this kind of supply chain issue, and all the OEMs that I spoke with are like, my order bank is full for 2023. No more buses for 2023. It's like beginning of February, January, right? The order bank is full. It's so unusual, right? But this is all that whole supply chain thing. So now if you put in bus orders, they're not coming until 2024. And what is the fluctuation in raw material costs? Are you going to get a 10%, 20%, maybe more increase in the cost of the bus from when you order it today to when you receive it in 2024? That is super crazy to me, because the way we budget for school districts and contractors, you're trying to plan it out. You're going to your school board, you're asking for money. Now you're saying, I got to wait 18 months, maybe longer, to get a bus, and it might cost 30% more than what you're telling me today. How do I plan for that? It's going to shock the system, and the cost of electric vehicles is so much higher. And, as time keeps clicking away, Ryan, that those deadlines of the 2027 GHG emissions coming soon. Then you've got different states with their proclamations, which is totally politically driven, right? We need to be all electric, no more ICE-based engines, no more internal combustion engines going to be produced in states like California, New York, other places as well that are going to come out with this. It just, something's got to give, right? It's just, there's just a lot happening, and school districts are really going to feel the burn. But guys, I think you really need to go back and redefine the capital purchasing of school buses with this change in landscape. It's just crazy to me, Ryan.
Also, what needs to happen is, if it's not already happening, is a refocus on predictive maintenance for school buses. And obviously, so many school districts have this, ingrained in themselves. But what you're talking about, Tony, that's shocking to me, that the OEMs are already, their books are filled, because we had very, very marginal gains last school year with the production. 32,873 is what I reported in our buyer's guide that came out last month. And very slight increase, and certainly not enough to address the age-old problem in this industry of too many old buses on the road and not being able to replace them fast enough. And, it's like what you're saying, Tony, it's not the problem of demand. The demand is there. So when you tell me that the OEMs are already saying their books are full, that means they're still catching up on last year because of all these supply chain issues.
Most definitely. That's totally true. Absolutely.
And what you were saying of districts or bus companies not getting their buses for, 18 months. I think we ran a survey in the fall, and it found that I believe it was about 7 or 8 months longer than normal to receive a new bus order. And that was just an average, right? It went up to, as high as 18 months, like you were saying. So they're just catching up with orders that were made last year. So what does that mean for next year's numbers when we're reporting in 2024? It's going to probably be pretty, even keel to what it was the last couple of years, and that's just not good enough. And that's a real big issue. Regardless if you're trying to buy electric school buses, propane, you're trying to get ahead of the 2027 EPA emissions rule that you just mentioned. These folks need buses, and what we don't want to have is older buses on the road. Certainly, they've gotten cleaner. Diesel is, 90% cleaner than 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 1/60th of the emissions of way back when. But still, we're looking at buses that don't have the newest technology. Look at how far technology has come with our, automated driver assistance systems, with all the, the LED lights to make it more visible, like what I was mentioning earlier about being able to see buses better at school bus stops. There's just so much that goes into today's school bus that really keeps that trajectory of the safest mode to get kids to and from school. That just hampers the effort. So big ticket items for the industry to really try to tackle this year. And like you said, looking at budgeting, shifting the budget cycle, maybe trying to get ahead of things. And that's, when you're talking about something like that, I mean, that's a seismic shift, right, Tony? It's opposite the way school districts have been used to operating for decades upon decades. But it really requires a new vision, a new way of looking at things.
Yeah, other kind of big takeaways is we had an infrastructure panel subsequently after that OEM panel, and they were talking a little bit about kind of the checklist of things you need to do, right? How do you set yourself up for success if you are considering alternative energy, right? Consider, running your bus in real world conditions, right? With all the electronics and things that you would have, air conditioning, heating, bus full of kids, right? What are the real world conditions that you're going to experience? And what are the outcomes? What are the performance issues? Thinking about weather and topography and all these sorts of things are really, you need to do an in-depth analysis also with your routing, right? How do you maximize your routes based on the battery, based on that driver performance? Because the buses that are electric drive differently than diesel engines. So you almost have to retrain drivers. And, an anecdotal story that came up in the OEM panel is that Jim Crowcroft from Thomas Built Buses said that drivers were actually playing a game that they were trying to maximize the yield they were getting out of these batteries to try to get more distance. If that's regenerative braking or just changing driver behavior, it almost is like they're relearning almost from each other how to take advantage of some of this new technology. So super interesting to me to see all the little nuances that are happening around this subject matter, and definitely taking a proactive approach, modeling how it works for your district or how your company, and seeing if this really pencils out to be worth it, right? Is it worth taking the leap, or should you wait? Because like anything, technology keeps advancing. The new version comes out. Maybe it takes a few years, but even with production where it is, it doesn't mean the engineering and the R&D stops. It's just where can they build that into the next generation of electric bus? So, maybe that by this lag in manufacturing to some degree or delivery, we may see a technology advancement happen maybe quicker in the next generation of vehicles simply because of that lag. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
Absolutely. And another thing that jumped out to me from that conversation was, back to your funding sales tax and the realization or the kickstarting that reminder that, some states, when you're looking at contractors, a lot of states, in fact, they don't cover the sales tax for these contractors. Now, school districts, for a large part, they have that sales tax waived, right? But when you look at the contractors now able to access that that EPA Clean School Bus program funds, that's a big touchdown as they were celebrating there from this past year. But a lot of these states are now looking at these. A lot of these contractors are looking at it, going, "Oh, wait a second, but we have to still cover the sales tax." And when we're talking about a $395,000 to $450,000 vehicle, sales tax is very substantial. So, a lot of great takeaways coming from this conversation, coming from this conference, a lot to digest on an editorial standpoint, a lot of articles to look at, a lot of content for upcoming conferences. So, Tony, I think we have some work to do. Stay tuned, folks.
Definitely. And guys, as you kind of consider your green strategy, I got a green tip from you by Nuvve. It's a clean tech company helping schools intelligently electrify their fleets. Nuvve offers a complete turnkey solution to help schools confidently electrify the fleet. They provide expert guidance through every step of the process, from selecting electric buses and recommending the best charging solution based on your district's routes, to grant writing support, flexible financing options, With Nuvi, you'll enjoy the world's most intelligent charging, simple tools for your transportation directors and drivers, and the opportunity to bring cleaner rides to your students and communities today. To get started, visit them at nuvi.com/STN. That's nuvi.com/STN. All right, Ryan, looking forward to your interview with Miss Nicole Portee. Take it away, my friend.
Let's welcome to the School Transportation Nation podcast stage, Nicole Portee, Assistant Superintendent of Operations for Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools in North Carolina, and a familiar name, I think, to a lot of folks out there in the nation. Nicole, thanks so much for joining us today. It's great to see you. I have the pleasure of being able to see you. I know all those folks out in the nation can't. You can only hear your wonderful voice, but how are you doing?
I am doing great, and I am super excited to be on today and super excited to see you as well.
Absolutely. One of my favorite people that I've come across over my 2 decades in the industry. It's hard to believe, but Nicole and I, we've known each other for quite a long time. And, a lot of you, as I mentioned, the name is familiar. You might remember 2018, Nicole was our STN Transportation Director of the Year. And you were in Denver at the time, Denver Public Schools. Now you're in Charlotte.
Yes.
Update everyone. Kind of, how has your career trajectory changed since maybe some folks last read about you or saw you?
Yes, so I actually left Denver Public Schools, in which I served there for about 16 years, and headed to Charlotte or North Carolina, where I joined the Guilford County Schools as a senior executive director over operations, which was, a great ride there. I actually arrived there 6 months prior to the pandemic. And so that was really interesting, but did a lot of work with the operations team there, getting them up and going for returning students to school. So that was very interesting and a great team that they have there. So I headed up to Charlotte, where I joined as the Assistant Superintendent of Operations. And I've just completed my first year, so I am super excited about that. They have an amazing team here. And I currently work under the direction of the Chief Operating Officer, Mr. Brian Schultz. And we have several departments in which we provide oversight here in the district.
And then transportation being one of them, right? What are the other departments that you're overseeing?
So we have transportation, we have school nutrition, we have all of building services, we have our warehouse, we have capital, so that would include construction, as well as our graphic productions. They do a lot of the printing, booklets, report cards for our schools. So pretty large team.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you certainly sound like you keep busy. Now, Charlotte, that's one of the fastest growing areas of the nation. And you mentioned, facilities and construction. That's probably, you guys are probably building schools left and right.
That is correct, Ryan. We are completing a comprehensive needs review, which includes about 40 projects totaling $2.8 billion. And so we hopefully that will make its way to our Board of Education as well as our county commissioners to put on the ballot for November.
Oh, boy. And of course, there's a lot of implications there for transportation. So staying plenty busy. Now, so I was mentioning Denver, again, Denver Public Schools, where you're the executive director of transportation when you're there. Now, you're originally from the Denver area, correct?
So I'm originally from Tulsa, Oklahoma, but
Okay.
I have been in Denver a good portion of my life and career. So certainly give credit to Denver. Everyone that knows me, they they've known me for a long time.
Absolutely. And so, being February now, and it's Black History Month, and on stonline.com, you can head over there to the website, check out an article that is right fresh off the presses. Art Gissendaner, one of our writers, sat down with you, Nicole, about actually a year ago, and we wanted to save it for this month. And it's talking about your youth when you were in Denver, and specifically looking at the issue of desegregation busing. And Denver was one of those big metropolitan areas. Of course, the Supreme Court in the 70s, early 70s, made that essentially the law of the land to back up Brown v. Board of Education, that hallmark SCOTUS case. But interestingly, talking to you about your experiences growing up, and you were taking the bus. Did you take the bus just in high school, or did you take it all throughout your educational career in Denver?
I actually took it early on in my educational career, and then we moved, and so that put me closer to a school that I was able to walk to, but then end up having to be bused in my high school years. So certainly a different experience during a time where I really wanted to go to, my neighborhood school.
Actually, and if you read Art's article, I mean, when we go back and look at that time of our nation's history, obviously, one could argue things have gotten better. Maybe they have in some ways. Maybe they haven't as advanced as definitely haven't advanced as far as they should have. But certainly, it was a pretty scary time, and there was a big bus bombing in the early 70s. I think that was maybe when you were a little bit younger, or even not quite on the bus yet. But certainly the experience of riding the bus to and from school, and that whole effort to desegregate, that really shaped a lot of where Nicole Portee would be in her adult life and in your professional career. Tell us a little bit about how that shaped some of your perspectives on student transportation and what you've done and worked on over your career.
Yeah, so Ryan, I think one of the areas of transportation that sometimes doesn't get highlighted is that in transportation we sort of get the ability to kind of see where our students are. We see where they are, where they reside, as well as where they attend school, and we see it from certainly areas where there's very dense populations of students who attend schools and which schools. And so I think experiencing what I did as a student in Denver Public Schools, and then being in a position where I'm looking at maps and I'm looking at the routing and how decisions are being made, it sort of gives you a holistic picture of how and where how decisions are being made, but also the impact it has on students and families and how they make choices. And it also helps with the, how programs are identified and designed and where they're placed, and what families are picking and choosing to attend those programs. So knowing and seeing a lot of that information, it's helped me to be a contributing member as part of a transportation personnel with a larger team to say, these are some of the models that we could potentially use in order to ensure that students and families have choice, they have access, but also ensuring that it's equitable service being provided across the district. And I think having that operational lens and being able to see the district from a different perspective has really helped shape how I contribute to larger conversations around services and how we provide those services to our families.
And of course, the Supreme Court in 2007 ruled that race should no longer be a factor in educational placement and in attending school. people can certainly argue and make a very strong case that we've seen kind of a rubber band effect where there is more segregation now and for various reasons in a lot of our schools. Now, being in Charlotte-Mecklenburg now, Charlotte has a very rich history of how desegregation busing actually led to a lot of academic successes. So I'm curious where that all lies now, especially when you're looking at school busing, if you can give a little bit of an overview of what school busing looks like in Charlotte, and looking at the opportunities that are available to students in today's environment.
So one of the things I will say, Charlotte-Mecklenburg has the largest transportation fleet in North Carolina. We currently transport about 78% of the enrollment, which is at 141,000 students. And that equates to about 925 buses that are on the road daily. To give a little context, the transportation department here operates from what we call three transportation zones. And that is sort of derived based off of programming where schools are located. And they are very deliberate and diligent about ensuring where and how they place programs. There is board policy that helps shape how programs and how magnet choice lotteries work here to ensure that there is a integrated balance of students being able to, one, attend the program as well as having access to those programs. And so a lot of work has been done to ensure that there is balance around how services are being provided from a transportation lens. But us, like all other school districts across the country, we are working diligently to retain our drivers, as well as dealing with a little bit of a driver shortage. So with that, that has caused us to take a look at how do we become a little bit more innovative in how we provide those services and creating that same level of access. And so the work there has been really focused in on partnering with our planning department as well as our magnet department to ensure that we are, looking at a holistic picture opposed to academics sort of making decisions and then transportation trying to sort of figure this whole logistic puzzle out each and every year. It's really a collaborative process.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And you talk about the driver shortage, great segue, because that's what I wanted to hit on next specifically. And I was rereading the other day the article when you won the 2018 Transportation Director of the Year award. Back then, you were addressing the driver shortage because there's been a driver shortage. It's not new, a driver shortage in school transportation, but it's just the severity of it right now. But you had implemented, years back in Denver, going to more of a type A model where the drivers didn't need CDLs, and you found that to be, very beneficial to the district. And we've talked with a lot of folks across the nation who have done some similar things or have begun to do similar things like that. Is that something that Charlotte's doing? What are some of those innovations that you mentioned? We've seen a growth in alternative transportation, non-yellow transportation, network companies. What's Charlotte doing to try to kind of overcome or at least address the driver shortage?
So one of the things I will say, certainly we, just like all other school districts, we are really pushing on, job fairs. We're going out and we have our actual transportation staff that's leading those efforts in order to try to recruit and hire and retain drivers coming in. We've, provided some level of increase for drivers. But as we know, that's not enough, right? And so what we have done is just really taking a look and reassessing. We're sort of faced with funding shortages. And as a result, it's forcing us to have to think innovatively around how do we both address the staffing shortage during a time where you don't necessarily have all of the funding. And so in some cases, it's forcing us to take a look at how we have provided service, how we can continue to provide it, but it may look and feel a little differently than what it has been. Charlotte's been really huge on making sure that they can provide service for students. You know, really short walking distances. We have to take into consideration the environmental landscape. There's not a lot of sidewalks here. And so that has been somewhat challenging, especially with new neighborhoods going up, in the ability to still provide the same level of service, which a lot of families, by right, they've had it for a long time, they want to continue, and it's a change. We have not necessarily had the ability to implement non-CDL drivers. That is regulated by the state in terms of what types of buses we can purchase and utilize. And I think that differs from state to state. Denver's very different than North Carolina and their state regulations as it pertains to operating a bus fleet. So that within itself has presented some, I would say, small challenges in terms of how do we address this thing called driver shortage. And I think one of the things we are trying to do, sort of reverting back to the collaboration with our planning team, our magnet, the academic side of the house, and really just thinking innovatively about how do we still provide yellow bus services without necessarily making cuts. And we know that some districts are faced with making those tough decisions about cutting service opposed to actually modifying the service in a way that still supports our family. So we will be implementing next year for a small population of our magnet schools, we will be implementing what we call express stops. And this is really bus stops that we have created at high schools, as well as other areas where areas where we find that families have challenges getting their students to those locations. We are trying to identify central pickup locations. And the essence of that is to make sure that we can get students to school a lot longer. What we've experienced here is with so much transportation that we provide, students are on the bus a lot longer. And our magnet transportation happens to be one of those services that has become very costly as a result.
And so, you're talking efficiencies, right? So I'm thinking
Absolutely.
here, and when you said that shuttle type thing, I was thinking about, it sounds a lot like something that you played a pretty big role in, the Success Express in Denver, which was actually the brainchild of your predecessor, Pauline Gervais, our, tenured faculty emeritus member for the Transporting Students with Disabilities and Special Needs Conference, good friend of STN's, obviously did, so much with you and in your career. But it sound, when you were saying that, I'm like, oh, that sounds really familiar. So, if you could take people just really quickly through that, you mentioned it a little bit about it, but it's kind of like, it's like hubs, right? Where they circle around and they have, instead of having buses necessarily all going from out on route and picking up kids at their homes or in different streets, you have these kind of circular hubs where kids kind of go from one hub to the next and then get to school, right?
Yeah, so that model itself in Denver was really focused in on enrollment zones. So the intent of that model was to complement the schools and programs in our far northeast area and our near northeast area. And it was really designed to be like a transit bus, like
Mm-hmm.
your regular transit bus that picks up folks and take them from this location, and they make stops along the way. And so it was designed to, one, give families flexibility to pick and choose where they wanted to drop off their student, and get on the bus and sort of ride to school, and home from school. It gave flexibility for after school activities, and it also gave flexibility for students who would have otherwise missed the bus. They had several opportunities to still get to school. So the objective there was, again, trying to make sure that we were creating a system that was flexible, innovative, gave multiple opportunities for students to get to and from school, and overall complement the programming that was occurring in those two communities.
Excellent. And you also mentioned a second ago, you mentioned environment, and I think you were talking about the environment that students are in, and you mentioned a lack of a lot of sidewalks in your area. But in terms of green school buses, right? Obviously, we have in a couple months' time, April, May timeframe, the second year of the EPA Clean School Bus Program. Curious, where does Charlotte-Mecklenburg come down in terms of the green school bus conversation? What are you guys using? Are you interested in electric? Do you have electric yet? What does that look like?
Yeah, so we are entering, and I do want to just recognize our executive director of transportation here, Mr. Adam Johnson, who is leading the charge. He has worked very diligently to make sure that we still have diesel. We have over 100 propane buses, and we are now going through the process of capturing and purchasing the electric buses. Right now, I think we have 3 slated. That process has been fairly slow. However, it is on our radar. We are engaging in the conversations, and we're hoping to secure those buses really soon.
Okay, great. And I noticed that it looks like you guys weren't on the award list for the first round, and I don't know, are these funds something that the school district is actively going after to procure these buses, or is there another mechanism in play?
So the mechanism here is to work through our Department of Public Instruction, who is sort of the overseer of the funds. And so we have gone through that process to apply, to help us with securing the buses.
Excellent, excellent. And last but not least, I want to talk real briefly about some politics. And I think that, certainly politics is in play in a lot of different areas of life, but certainly school districts, right? And I know one of the things you're aware of is, at our STN Expo, we have really focused on trying to give the tools to student transporters, especially both those at the transportation director level with our transportation director summit, a higher level of, not just the operational ins and outs of the day and routing and such not, but giving them the tools to network and discuss, big picture items, and also give some tutelage to some of the folks that aspire to be, a transportation director one day, or a supervisor, or even an assistant superintendent, for example. So I'm just curious. There's a lot of chatter right now looking at school administrations. It just seems to be especially challenging right now for a lot of folks in administrations. I'm just curious your thoughts on as you've come up and what you've learned, and kind of playing that political game. But any advice you have for our listeners who are out there and they're wanting to climb the ladder, and they're trying to kind of prepare themselves for what lies ahead?
So, what I will say to that is, certainly you have to be passionate about the work. You have to be passionate about certainly working in, whether it's operations or even on the academic side. I think based on your experiences within your district, and I would say take every opportunity that is presented to learn about how to support students. I know you can do it within your regular day-to-day job, but I think it's important to understand how this big puzzle called education sort of works, right? From the work you do to, how does it affect the families? What are the changes that are happening not only within operations, but what drives those changes from the academic lens, as well as being in tune to what the school board is actually talking about, understanding very clearly what the strategic plan is of the district and how you fit into that larger plan. And in doing all of that, I think it helps with your ability to think differently about how you approach your work, how you contribute, as well as how you advocate for being a voice at the table. And that's anyone that knows me, I'm really big about making sure that your voice is at the table or operations is at the table. We're part of this big picture. And I would say we're part of the whole child. We talk about, we're the first to see them in the morning, we're the last to see them before they go home. All of those pieces of the puzzle work together in order to ensure that each and every child has a free and appropriate education, and that they can access a great education. And so I think if you're passionate about the work, certainly do those things, as well as building up your network. Meet people. It's not a bad thing to ask someone to be a mentor that is currently in this particular role or any role that you desire to be in. And so I've done all of those things. I continue to do them. I think it's been very beneficial. I've had the opportunity to meet folks across the country, and they've given me some really great advice. But what really helps is when you're trying to think innovatively and think differently, guess what? You can call those folks in your network and you can say, hey, let me bounce something off of you. And we like to share information. Like, why recreate when you don't have to? So those would be some of the things that I would certainly encourage anyone who is wanting to be an executive director or assistant superintendent, a COO, whatever it is you desire to be. And certainly there's room for people. I think a lot of people are retiring. They're now thinking about different careers. And I also want to add that COVID itself presented a lot of challenges, but it also presented a lot of opportunity. And it also presented the ability for our community to see how hard operations has worked and continues to work to support the whole child.
Absolutely. Well, very, very well said. Thank you. I knew the advocacy was going to come out when I asked that question. I knew that. Great insights. It's always a pleasure to talk to you and see you, and hopefully I get to see you in person soon.
Yes.
We have our STN Expo. I tried to get you to TSD conference last year. It didn't quite work out. We got our STN Expos coming up. And, I was reminded also, too, before we leave, I was rereading Claudia's article, and you love to sing. And I don't know how we haven't gotten together and done a little, you're way better than I am, but a little harmony, maybe, having a beverage or two, and that would be great. So we will talk. Nicole Portee, Assistant Superintendent of Operations for Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools in North Carolina, 2018 STN Transportation Director of the Year Award winner. Thank you so much, Nicole. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, Ryan, that was a great discussion with Nicole. Thank you so much. Guys, before we wrap up, got a message from our sponsor, TransFinder. They've taken a special interest in student discipline issues on the bus. The goal is to help kids get the help they need as early as possible. They've created Form Finder, which makes recording these incidents easy, and you can even follow up easier too. It can be used district-wide. Form Finder is embedded in TransFinder's Route Finder Flush solution and is included for free. It goes far beyond student contact. Plus, It is customized for any form the district needs. Imagine one clearinghouse for all your district forms. You guys can learn more about Form Finder by emailing getplus@transfinder.com or giving them a call at 800-373-3609. Hey, again, guys, special thanks to all our sponsors today, TransFinder, First Student, and Nuvi. We couldn't do it without you guys. Remember, guys, you can subscribe to the podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to pods. We love you, nation. We'll see you next week.